Activist investor Nelson Peltz is threatening to stage a shareholder revolt against the Walt Disney Company and its CEO Bob Iger and Bob Iger's fellow board members. The last time they faced off like this, Bob Iger was very adversarial to Peltz's Trian partners. Bob Iger stated that Nelson Peltz doesn't have the necessary experience to help the Walt Disney Company. So let's talk about that experience on That Park Place. Hello, I'm Jonas J. Campbell from That Park Place, where we cover entertainment, streaming, theme parks, and video games twice a day. Maybe hit the like button or subscribe if you're interested in that. We recorded this particular conversation before the Walt Disney Company earnings call, but thankfully they announced almost nothing of consequence during the call, so everything we say is 100% up to date. Well, let's get into it. On February 9th, Trian congratulated Disney on its recently announced operating initiatives, which Trian believes is a win for all shareholders and broadly aligns with its thinking. Trian is pleased with the role it played in helping to focus the board to take decisive actions. As the news reported on this announcement, I'll throw this one to you. How did the news report on the this statement from Trian?
Well, the news media has largely been very derisive and divisive and dismissive of Trian. They are not happy about them because, of course, the mainstream and access media up until this point has been absolutely in lockstep with what Walt Disney, the company, not the man, has been doing as of late. And now they're really struggling to figure out what narrative it is they're supposed to be doing. And that's how we get into situations with Trian, where they really, these are not business individuals who are covering this often. But at the same time, you have situations where, for example, they are covering the Marvels and the official narrative, I guess, that the mainstream media is doing and the access media follows in their shadow. They're supposed to say that that's a failure. So they've all adopted that. It's a failure. It's a failure. It's a failure. And so that's what they know to say. And at the same time, they're talking about Wish, which is coming out and is now projected to make less on the opening, maybe not in the long term, but on the opening, make less. And yet they call that record-breaking and tremendous and all of these things.
Right.
Because they're not analytical. They just carry the water for what the narrative is supposed to be, and the facts don't matter. The facts are filler for whatever it is the conclusion is supposed to be, and it's predetermined. They didn't have to think about it anyway, right? It's like a math problem where you get an answer, and who cares what's above it? As long as the answer is right, they don't understand it.
Lou, did you have something to say there?
I said they are just following orders.
So around February 9th, I would say that the Walt Disney Company and the access media portrayed this as Nelson Peltz exiting and quote unquote losing the proxy fight or fending off Peltz. But from the Nelson Peltz perspective, and he doesn't have media in his pocket, I'd say that he takes this all as a win.
Wait a minute. Jonas, are you telling me that the news reported the opposite of probably what was happening, and they did so in Disney's favor?
Yeah.
Shocked.
I think that's what I'm saying.
Shocked, I tell you.
Wow.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked there's gambling taking place in this here establishment.
Well, let's add to it, and let's talk a little bit about how Nelson Peltz operates for one of his clients here. So this article from John F. Trent from Bounding into Comics. When turning around faltering companies like the Walt Disney Company, Nelson Peltz, founding partner of Trian Fund Management, explains his objectives and tactics when turning around companies. This is from an interview that he did with Bloomberg Wealth. Given Peltz clearly wants to make changes to the Walt Disney companies, it would be instructive to know how he's going to make changes to previous companies that were in Walt Disney's situation. David Rubenstein of Bloomberg Wealth, that's who did the interview. He told Rubenstein, "We're not an active investor." But that term, activist investor, and you'll probably hear Valiant say this tomorrow if you tune into the live stream. Activist investor has nothing to do with the terms activist as it is traditionally held. Culture, do you want to explain the difference between an activist investor, a traditional activist, and also a passive investor?
Well, passive investors are like you and me. We all have money tied up in various companies through our retirement programs, right? Whether it's a Roth IRA or a 401k or one, you can direct it, but you certainly can't, manage the assets completely. So at the same time, an activist investor is somebody who's very active in the management of their funds. They go out and they try to invest accordingly in the things that they're interested in, forcing them to succeed. Nelson Peltz is an activist in that way because he's actively pushing companies to do better and earn him more money because that's their job. That's what you're supposed to do, is earn the shareholders' money. If you grant stocks, then you should be looking out, using the fiduciary duties as your guide. Is your fiduciary duty primarily is to shareholders.
Right. So this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with green initiatives, correct?
No, this is not an ESG move. This is not any of those other fancy terms that you hear when it comes to specialized activist activities, because that's not what this means. It just means that he is actively in pursuit of profit for whatever company he invests his money and time into.
So thank you, Coulter. And to just add to the things that he is actively trying to do, he says we're not there to leverage up these companies, which is when you buy a company and you get them to take on debt in order to pay you back for purchasing the company, otherwise known as a leveraged buyout. That would be something that like Bain Capital did with Toys R Us, where they bought Toys R Us and got them to take on enough money to pay the back. And which is why Toys R Us is gone. And thank you, Mitt Romney, for that. That is not a political statement. That is a business statement. Make no mistake. He says, we're not there to split them up, although I might disagree with that. We're not there to do all the terrible things that typically go along with the term activist. Funny that he used the word terrible to go along with activist. We're just trying to get these companies to operate better the way they used to. Peltz explains how the interactions with CEOs can go. Sometimes no one is thrilled that we're there, I'll say. Some are much more receptive to hear what we're going to say. We've put together a white paper to go over with management, and that white paper stays private as long as we're in conversation. And if we want a board seat when we think that they're ready to give us a board seat, it will always stay private. So it's a little bit of a shakedown here, he relayed.
So not every company wants the doctor when the doctor is on call.
Right. But if they refuse, then we make that white paper public.
Just a spoonful of Trian makes the medicine go down.
Just a quick question. Anyway, is anyone out there aware of the white paper coming out for the Walt Disney Company?
Please share.
I was not aware.
It has not come out. It exists somewhere and it has not been made public. So if someone were to read the tea leaves, Vash, if white papers only come out when CEOs and board members stop cooperating with Nelson Peltz, and if there is no white paper, how would you conclude that? And what would you conclude?
I think I see where this is going.
I think I would conclude that that white paper is somewhere, probably with Trian, and they're maybe using it as a bargaining chip, perhaps.
I think you might be correct there.
Just a point of clarification: this is not a Snow White paper.
There might actually Snow White might be involved in this white paper, considering that they just pushed that thing back a year.
Snow White and the 7 activist investors. I don't know.
They've got at least 2 activist investors.
And maybe we want to define for our audience here what a white paper actually is.
A white paper is, let me see if I've got it here. Actually, I do have a breakdown of the white paper that was delivered to the PepsiCo board way back in 2014 from Business Wire. It contains basically a number of conclusions from Trian Fund Management on how a business is not operating correctly and how it can be fixed. So it says Trian is concerned by PepsiCo's continuing underperformance since 2006, which Trian believes is due primarily to PepsiCo's misguided reliance on the power of one strategy. And they go into some of the details here. This is not the white paper itself. This is a breakdown of the white paper. This particular one is 31 pages, so we're not going to go through all of it. Yes, sir.
Criticisms he's leveling are at the management of Pepsi that the guy who just became the CFO of Disney was part of, right?
Yes.
So there's an interesting little bit of Byzantine interconnection.
Before we move from Peltz to Pepsi, let's just talk about what Disney is facing right now. In this article from That Park Place, for all the news that should be fun, Peltz versus Iger spills the beans Disney wanted secret. There was an SEC filing that detailed, from Disney's side, all of their attempts to rebuff Peltz. He started in July of 2022 with Bob Chapek still as the CEO. And then the two of them, Perlmutter and Peltz, Isaac Perlmutter is involved in this as well, who was still a member of the Walt Disney Company at the time. He was the chairman of Marvel Entertainment, even though it seemed to be mostly an honorary position. Peltz and Perlmutter called every board member, it seems like pretty constantly, haranguing them to try to get Peltz a seat on the Disney board. Also offering help to Bob Chapek to say, I can help you. Keep your status on the ascension here. And here's this interesting quote from Ike Perlmutter. Without Peltz here, Mr. Iger would be back at Disney. That was the middle of last year. And funny enough, this was also after Bob Iger had left as executive chairman. But where was Bob Iger, of course, at this time? Bro?
Where was Bob Iger at the time of all of this?
Yes.
Taking a shower.
And where
Sitting
was
on
that
his
shower
yacht.
located?
Well, it may have been located in the offices of one Mr. Chapek, also known as Booted Bobby.
Absolutely. If he doesn't get his way, we have a list here also, another article by this blowhard, Jonas Campbell. All of the proposals.
Again on thatparkplace.com. It seems like you write there a few times.
Yeah, I try to in lead up to the annual shareholders meeting, which tomorrow's earnings call is not the same as an annual shareholders meeting. He put forward a bunch of proposals. Proposals 1 through 5 were all put forward by Trian partners. The first proposal was the election of Nelson Peltz or a Trian fund management nominee, which would have been probably Nelson Peltz's son, to the Walt Disney board. 2 through 4 were all about accounting issues and executive compensation, which, by the way, we didn't really go into it, but Mr. Johnston probably getting about $20 million for signing on here, and there's no way he's not getting that money.
Is it fair to say, Jonas, that that Disney acquiesced in the first proxy war, that they acquiesced to almost all points outside of putting Nelson Peltz or another of the Trian members onto the board, and as well as the Communist China requests?
I would say everything except the Communist China request he made it, and there's an interesting tactic. Lou, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and ask you a question about negotiations. When you're negotiating and you want X, do you just go in and say I want X, and then leave it at that?
Well, you have to present them with a real and credible threat that if you don't get it, you'll say no to other things. Nobody wins a negotiation unless they're willing to walk away.
In your history of dealing with negotiations, have you ever engaged in the practice of what some might call sandbagging, adding in extra items to your negotiation that maybe are not of primary interest to you?
You mean disposables, that which one could part with, that are superfluous to the main demands?
That is certainly a common tactic out there. I'll just put it that way. My experiences directly and not indirectly were a little different, because when we've all seen what's going on with the actors and the writers and everybody else, when Hollywood goes to what's called early negotiations, they make a point of, we're doing that, and the concession is we're only going to talk about these 5 things or these 7 things and nothing else, as opposed to all those other extra goodies that get thrown into a regular negotiation. And the reason they go to early is so that if you wait till the very last minute, a lot of things that may have been started will have to stop, and therefore there will be a slowdown prior to that date of things starting, and everybody doesn't work during that. It's almost like a strike before the strike. But that's a specific situation, not like this.
Now, I wonder, with this Communist China proposal that he put in here, saying that they want a full breakdown of Disney's operations in China and how vulnerable the company is to the CCP, also known as the government of China. I wonder if this was a legitimate proposal. If this was, obviously they were going to take it, and it would, I think, severely damage the Walt Disney Company in the eyes of the American people and the American government.
I find what they named it interesting.
Well,
if you were making a deal with the American government, would you say with the Republican Party or the Democratic Party? No, you would say with the USA. And we all know China is a communist government, but everything is communist through this thing to kind of reinforce it.
yes, it is. Now, it's the legitimate title. Sorry, the proper title is Business Operations Report, but they do literally state here the Communist Chinese government. There by the end of it. I suppose the author was taking a little bit of narrative flair there to get the point to maybe readers who aren't interested in digging into
I'm just saying they're making the point of how vulnerable they are because communist governments don't act like everybody else and play nice when it comes to taking property away if they get mad at you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it would be like living on a compound that is run by, say, the mafia. Although I think I like the mafia more because you can be nice and sometimes they'll provide for the people there.
And you get cannoli.
Love a good cannoli.
I do agree with you, Jonas. It might have been some sandbagging here. I mean, this couldn't have looked good. perhaps Nelson Peltz was going to keep that private, like the white paper, for example, right? But letting that information out there loosely, that's probably something the Walt Disney Company didn't want to do. But we have talked about before on this channel and other channels how precarious of a position they're in when it comes to some of their parks in in CCP territory and some of the parks as well.
Speaking of the undisclosed white paper, Disney, if their people were smart at all, and I'm not discounting that possibility in spite of evidence to the contrary, would have a pretty good idea what's in that white paper and what other issues are out there. And dumping this one in public is a way of saying, and if you don't like that, wait till you see what's coming if you don't toe the line.
Exactly, yes. What you put out in public is not going to be your final position, and it's definitely not what you're saying in private.
And it's not the worst thing you've got to hold against them.
This conversation was originally part of That Park Place Live, which we do every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Feel free to hit the notification bell if you want to be notified. Of course, like this video if you like this video. Share it out on social media if you know someone who might be interested. And we would be honored if you would subscribe to That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.
Thanks for watching That Park Place News. For more information, consider checking out www.thatparkplace.com. And don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and send this out on your favorite social media accounts.